Hi everyone, welcome to the Is It Policast, the Policast that is held by the DA Abroad. My name is Justin Adams. I am the European and UK Chair for the DA Abroad, and it's my pleasure today to welcome Annelie Lotriet, who is the chairperson of the DA Parliamentary Caucus and a member of the Ad Hoc Committee on Land Expropriation, and Noko Masipa, who is the DA member on the Portfolio Committee on Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. So welcome both. Now today we have got about half an hour-ish, hopefully, to try and unpack EWC, Expropriation Without Compensation, which is an immensely complicated and very emotive issue. And hopefully we can try and get to a few home truths on that subject. I think we'll definitely be having a follow-up at some point. But let's just get straight into it. So we talk about EWC and we talk about expropriation without compensation. And I'll start with you, Annelie. I mean, what does it mean? What does EWC mean in the context of what is being proposed by the government and what they're trying to do in a constitutional sense?
Okay, thank you, Justin. Yes, and thank you for the invitation. You're quite correct when saying that this is a very emotive issue. When we talk about expropriation without compensation, there are a number of matters that we have to take into consideration. And I think the first one that we have to focus on is the fact that this relates to a right in the Constitution. It is part of Chapter 2 of our Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights. And property rights, as protected in Section 25, is the crux, what this is all about. But we must also remember that property rights is the cornerstone of any democracy, and it is also the cornerstone and the guarantor of a rule of law, which is something that is one of our founding principles in Chapter 1 of our Constitution. Now, Section 25 is quite clear that you can't have arbitrary deprivation. So when we talk about EWC, we have to determine what are we talking about. Is it deprivation? Is it arbitrary? Is it like, for example, the ANC's proposals are more or less that it's tantamount to confiscation, and the EFF position, which is nationalization. So this is what we're grappling with at this particular point when we talk about EWC.
And so if I understand that correctly, I mean, Noko, I don't know if you've got any thoughts, because obviously your portfolio is particularly relevant, and I will come to this point on agriculture and land, but I mean, that's your area. But I mean, what are your thoughts on EWC in terms of what the proposal is from an agricultural perspective?
I think the question maybe, Justin, is why suddenly, change of hearts by the ANC to say, let's expropriate without compensation. This is my view, and I think many will agree that this was really to accommodate the ANC that lost the election at Nasrec 2017. So what this now then is that, it could lead to other things, which I think we got to be aware of. Things like protecting the corrupt activities of some of the members of the ANC, because let's remember what the president of Women's League said when he was in New York. He said, and I quote, "All of us in the NEC have our smaller nyana skeletons, and we don't want to take out all the skeletons because hell will break." So this is concerning because, with this EWC, it means that, your Bill of Rights is not protected. And as such, it is my view that if you're not careful about it, is that it might create a free-for-all. We are not a communist country. We are a democratic country. And in a communist country, obviously, the issue is that they believe that the land or the means of production belong to the state. And the EWC is really meant to do exactly that. And that's not what we signed for. That's not what we voted for. And that's why the Democratic Alliance is against this.
100% agreed. So there's actually there's some important points there. I think the first point is this EWC. Just talk me through, Annelie, when it talks about property, it's not talking about land, is it? It's talking about, well, you tell me, what does it include? I mean, my cell phone is my property, my car is my property. Now, as Noko's just alluded to, I mean, given the history of the last quarter of a century and what has happened from a corruption perspective, I mean, that could just be a free-for-all. So does this proposed amendment cover everything? Does it include all property, or is it just land? What does it include? How far does it go?
With the original motion that was adopted in Parliament in February 2018 to look into this, they looked into the whole of Section 25. And if you read Section 25, it actually says that the property is not limited to land, which is, like you say, it could be your intellectual property. It could be anything. This bill and the proposed amendment is that they refer to land and all improvements on it. Now, that in itself is very problematic because land is not defined only as agricultural land. It could be your house, it could be your apartment, and improvements on that, movable and immovable. So it could be the implements that you have. It could be absolutely the house, the furniture, everything on that land. So that makes it extremely problematic and very open.
Yeah. And I think, the one point, Noko, I just want to get your thoughts here, but the basis of all of this, the sort of narrative that seems to be put out there by the ANC is that this is to help the people. Now, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, the ultimate owner of any expropriated land would be the state. Is that right? And okay. So now the next question is, and coming from an agricultural background, I grew up on a farm and all that. And Noko, I'd really like to get your thoughts because I've read some of your stuff on this. Farming is not just land. Farming is the inputs, the infrastructure, the market, the road. If you don't have a reasonable road to be able to transport your produce to market, how do you do that? As well as the extension service, veterinary services, research and development, the whole web of things that go into making a farmer successful, at which the state in the last 25 years has failed to do on a huge scale. I mean, I just drive to where my parents are and I look at the state of the road, and if you had a vehicle, you've got to straight away cost in more for vehicle repairs because the road's gone to gone to hell, for lack of a better word. But I mean, Noko, let's just quickly touch on that because I read your piece the other day, and I mean, this concept is it's not even it's a communist concept, but B, the point I'm trying to make here is, what is the success rate? Well, not success rate, but how do you see the rest of the infrastructure around said land? What's the state of that in the rest of the nation? In terms of outside of the Western Cape, Noko?
Okay.
Farming,
let me start by saying that if restitution and reform are taken without regards for the rights of property owners, it will have disastrous consequences for both commercial farmers and emerging commercial farmers and the banks and all those who invested in properties and land in South Africa. And surely the economy is going to suffer. Let's just be honest about it. The land reform, land restitution and distribution failed, but not the Constitution. The Constitution is not the reason for the failure. It is the implementation of policies and lack of agency by the government. So those are the reasons for the failure. Now, coming to agriculture, I will just give you an instant, one or two instances. We've got a place called Gua, which used to be called Elliot. I would like to say that there is a success story from the government, from transferring the land to the new owners. But the reality is that there is no success. The people that received the land did not really get the support from the government.
Mm.
The government could not provide them with the service from the municipal point of view. This is a 46% ownership transfer of land from owned by white community to a black community. But because the municipality failed to provide them with the services, they couldn't farm. So the production has gone down the drain. The other example is the David Rahase. It took us as the DA to go to court. Ultimately, Judge Davis made court ruling that the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform must sell the land to Mr. Rahase. This was a 17-year battle with the state, where the state one-sidedly decided to change the lease contract from option to purchase to lease agreement without option to purchase.
Yeah.
And ultimately what happened here is that during that 17-year battle, the people illegally moved into this farmland to erect squatter camps, and they were refusing to move. So that you cannot blame the Constitution. Surely it's not Section 25 that you can blame them. It is obviously the government's implementation of policies.
Mm, mm. And I mean, that story is actually flabbergasting, because if you think about what that story is, so just for those that are listening, I mean, it was a 17-year battle that the DA took on to take the government, who is proposing that they take away land for the people. The DA had to take the ANC government to court to give them the right, to the farmer, the right to be able to farm his land and to purchase his land. It's absolutely ludicrous, and it really does expose the hypocrisy in the whole proposal. I mean, it's really it's crazy. But now, so I just want to quickly do one more point, and then I want to talk about what's happening in the Western Cape and some of the success stories that are happening there. But do we have any numbers? I know there was a land auditor that was, the DA, as long as I've been around, have been pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing for a land audit to say how much land is actually owned by whom. Okay, and what are the actual stats on that? I don't know, Annelie, do you want to jump in here? How much, because I know government is a huge landowner in South Africa, isn't it?
Yes, it is indeed. But I think Noko has that those kinds of figures with him.
Okay, yeah, Noko, go ahead.
Can I answer that? I think the land audit that was just completed now. What it did is that it just provided us, with a big overview of the land, the total land in South Africa. What that audit did not do was to say who owns what. As far as we are concerned, is that the target that the government had of the land reform program was that the target was 30%. To date, as far as we are concerned, is less than 7% of the land has been bought by the government and transferred into the black ownership. But that does not mean that the 7% is the total land that is in the hands of the black people. So the work needs to be done to determine of the 122 million hectares of land in the country, how much is owned by, call it commercial farmers, how much is owned by development farmers, how much is owned by industries, and so forth. So that work has just completed. I think it just needs to be dissected into, looking at the success and the failure. But here's a concern, Justin, which is a big concern, is that the transfer of land is great, but the production of the land is something that we are battling with. We've just seen recently in the province where Annelie is, where a farm which was transferred, some years back is dilapidated. There's no production taking place on that particular farm. And I think Annelie can talk more about that particular farm. So those are the stories, the heartbreaking stories that we are battling with, is that if expropriation without compensation take effect, what are going to be the effects? Because at the what we are seeing with the state managing just a few pieces of land is a horror movie in many of these pieces of land.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've got the Vrede Farm. Annelie can talk more about the Vrede Farm. So those are the challenges. The statistics, I think, is something that we need to work on and obviously validate it and make sure that, we know who owns what and where and so forth. We know that, in parts, I've got quite a number here that shows that 114 million hectare, which is about 93% in the country, is registered in the deeds office. So 7 million of of this land is which is not registered at the deeds office is in the Eastern Cape. But who owns that particular land is very important that we need to know. And the other 5.5 million is in the Limpopo area. But who owns that land is something that we need to determine, and so forth. So there are quite a numbers that one can play around. But I just want maybe to give a chance to talk about the Vrede Farm and the other one that just came recently, a shocking, like I say, a horror movie, in terms of the land reform under the ANC.
Yeah. And Andy, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I think it's very important. And before I say anything about the Vrede Dairy Farm, I think we also have to remember the whole issue of the trust land. That is also part of the whole issue as to where, and it's now conveniently been set aside that it's not really part of the whole Section 25 amendment. So some deal has also been made there. But just on the Vrede Dairy Farm, I think in summary, one can say that the process, the land restitution and land reform process was used as a corruption conduit. That is what happened in the end. The money ended up with the Guptas, with aided and abetted by the Free State Agricultural Department and the Premier, the then Premier. So that is the one problem we have with land reform. And Noko will know this, that in the end, it's all about corruption. It's incompetence, not the political will, and massive corruption. And the people who should benefit are left out in the cold.
Yeah. And I think, that's part of the whole problem here is that, we talk facts and figures and we say this happens and that happens. But at the end of the day, there's people that are being dispossessed. There's people being left out in the cold for all of this, There's farmers that were hoping that thought, this could be my ticket, and it's the government that's busy stripping that land or selling off or everything from those farms. And, it has a very human cost. All this corruption, all this, has a very human cost, which I think is kind of forgotten when we have these discussions, and it's an important point to remember. So, I mean, is this expropriation without compensation? The first example that comes to mind is obviously Zimbabwe. Being South African, from South Africa, Zimbabwe is the first. I mean, have there ever been any success cases globally where expropriation without compensation has worked? Annelie, do you know of any?
Not that we're aware of, because quite frankly, what you do is that someone's rights are infringed, because you cannot own property and you live on it, you work on it, and it is just expropriated with compensation. You are left in a much worse position. So the effect of it on the economy, the financial implications for a country's economy are, it's terrible. If one looks at Venezuela, if one looks at Zimbabwe, because the problem is, and people forget this, and this is something we've been talking about, Noko, the last while, is people forget the impact, the ripple effect, because you just talking about expropriation with compensation. Okay, there you take the land for whatever reason it is, but those pieces of land, the property is mortgaged. Now, who carries the risk? And in South Africa, the banking sector, and we actually have two cases in the Constitutional Court where the findings were that the government must step in, because people can't be left in a worse position than they were, including the banks, the bondholders. So this is very problematic. And in South Africa, nobody has addressed that, because the banks say they're not going to suffer the loss. You can't transfer that loss and financial trouble onto the person whose property it was. So what's going to happen in the end? What's going to happen to your credit ratings of your banks? Who's going to invest money in the country if your banking sector is going to collapse? So it's a very, very serious thing, this, and it doesn't work.
No, I agree. So, and I mean, just a point for those of you listening, most, if not all, governments across the globe have an expropriation clause within their laws, because you have to, as a government, have it. So I just want to make that point. It's not like it doesn't exist at all. It does exist, because in every country you will need to expropriate land for roads, for schools, for whatever it may be, for national good. So I mean, I just wanted to make that point, that expropriation does exist in most governments around the world. So it's not as if we're trying something, it does exist within the laws of South Africa already, for the good of the state, where they need to. So obviously, Noko?
Can I add on what maybe Annelie has just spoken?
Yeah.
BASA obviously issued their own. BASA is the Banking Association of South Africa.
Yeah.
They issued their own submission with regards to this EWC.
Yeah.
And they have highlighted 4 implications, which are: 1, economic implications of expropriation at nil compensation; 2, social implications of expropriation at nil compensation; legal implications; and obviously the last one, food security implications of expropriation at nil compensation. So these are quite, warning signals for all of us that if these matters are not taken, we will definitely be going the route of Venezuela. We know that it didn't work. Zimbabwe, it didn't work, and it doesn't work, and it will never work anywhere in the world. So I thought it is important to highlight that the Banking Association of South Africa is worried. I have written a parliamentary question to the Minister, the Treasury in this regard, who is the shareholder of the Land Bank, to ask if Land Bank has policies in place to protect those farmers that have loaned with the bank if expropriation without compensation takes effect. And the answer that we got is that his expectation is that the parliamentarians must make sure that we craft the legislation in such a way that the bank is protected as well as the farmers. So that's another task that we definitely need to look at, and that's the fight that we will be putting. Well, I thought it's important maybe to just bring that point up. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. I mean, so many important points. I mean, and that's why I said we're going to have to come back to this. And I know I'm laughing, because if I don't laugh, I'll cry. But I really don't envy the fight that you guys have got on your hands. And, huge respect from all of us abroad that are currently working abroad, for doing what you do. But I just want to quickly touch on, obviously, we've spoken about all these bad things, but let's talk. And I don't know, Annelie, let's start with you, but I don't know, Noko, you may be the best person here. What's happening in the Western Cape? What have the DA done? What is our policy? I know I've read the briefs in terms of some of the successful projects that we've had, and I know there was a figure of something in the region of 60-70% of land reform projects in the Western Cape are successful versus something in the single figures, for the other 8 provinces. Now, I mean, what is it? What are we doing differently? What have we done, and what do we propose? Annelie, let's start with you. I don't know if you've got any thoughts.
Yes, once again, that's not my forte, but I can say that we have been very successful, and specifically with shareholding schemes, in that people get shares and they work on the land, but they're also part owners. So that has been very successful, but I think Noko has the more detailed information about that.
Yeah, Noko, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so Justin, sorry, what we do here in the Western Cape, which was started some years ago, was a commodity approach. We have got about 11 commodity groups in the Western Cape. Your citrus, your deciduous fruit, your milk, your poultry, and so forth. So that commodity approach has allowed the government to intervene, help those farmers that are owned, that are on land that has been, restituted, to support them in order for them to be successful. Because one, we understand that these guys are onto the land without really prior experience or working on the farm. So this commodity approach, they come with technical support which they provide these farmers, and as such, they have been making this project success. So here's the thing in terms of the success. When we talk about 72 or 67% success rate. So what the Department of Agriculture, what they did here in the Western Cape is that they set up a matrix which with the areas that they need to look at in terms of the support that they need to give, and obviously, graduating these farmers from being a subsistence farm to a commercial level. So this is the success that we are talking about. And those farmers are able to export, they are able to obviously have market access and so forth. So they have built certain programs that are supporting these farmers to ensure that they are successful. So in other provinces, you will find that the percentage of success is less than 10%. And primarily because there is no coordinated support in terms of affording these farmers an opportunity to succeed. Let me give you a very typical example, Justin. We're sitting with drought in this whole country. What the Western Cape did is that they have instituted what they call field management, which biannually they will bring in the National Department of Agriculture, they will bring the cooperative, the disaster risk management from the province, and they themselves, and with the farmers, both the commercial and obviously the emerging farmers, they will go and assess the land and to see what is the need in terms of the drought impact. So on an annual basis, they do that. And after that, then they make a submission of a business plan. So in this case, they have managed to rescue or to support those farmers that would have fallen off as a result of the drought, especially the emerging farmers, where in other provinces, there are no such program. And now the query that we are getting now from other provinces is that why is the Western Cape receiving 170 million of drought relief, whereas the other provinces are not? Simple answer is that the Western Cape, they made sure that they go onto the ground and they provide the support that is needed for the farmers, and they put a sound business plan to support these farmers. So these are some of the stories behind the success of the Western Cape. Is one, partnering with the commercial agriculture, ensuring that they provide the mentorship, the support, and so forth. Two, they make sure that they partner with obviously the local government, the national government, and coordinate their support towards the farmers. Because if the support is not coordinated, let me just maybe go a little bit further to say, Justin, to support agriculture in this country, it requires a coordinated support. You have got public enterprise having interest in agriculture through the support of ESCOM. You have got the water and sanitation, obviously for water license. Then you are sitting with Treasury, because Treasury is the one that released the funding. And you're sitting with corporate governance, which is responsible for disaster management when there is problem. So if this department are not coordinated, agriculture is going to fail. But the Western Cape is able to put these things together, and they work together with various departments and ensuring that they support the agriculture, whereas other provinces are struggling to do exactly that.
Yeah, I mean, that to me, it's pretty straightforward. It's a matter of management and government. And a lot of what I heard from that was it's the provincial government. It's just a matter of public-private partnership and provincial government doing their job. And I mean, the numbers are there. The numbers, anyone can see the numbers. Numbers don't lie. It's all the numbers are there for the success to see. I mean, it's just staggering. It really, in my head, exposes the real drive behind what the national government are trying to do with this proposed amendment. It really, really, really does expose that whole. It just blows it wide open and shows that they just, I mean, we haven't really talked about it. And we're kind of running out of time, but I mean, it's a cornerstone of the national democratic revolution, and we'll have to probably do that a whole nother episode on that at some point. But I mean, the state being the owner of the land is a cornerstone of the national democratic revolution. And one of the things that the ANC consistently does do is they reaffirm their commitment to the national democratic revolution every 3 years, including Cyril Ramaphosa at the last national elective conference. So, I think it's there for anyone to see. I mean, just as a quick parting shot, I mean, how does this affect people overseas? How does this affect, I mean, very simply, and Annelie, I might be putting words here, but I just look at it and go, well, this is probably the worst thing that can happen to South Africa. I think of my family, my friends that are still living in South Africa. My whole goal of moving back to South Africa all goes away once the cornerstone of the economy, which is private property ownership, disappears. I mean, is that fairly rounded, effect on on us living abroad, Annelie?
Absolutely, Justin. That is the main problem, is that, one cannot just view expropriation as something on the side. This will affect the total economy. It will affect the future of this country. It will affect the democratic dispensation in our country, the rule of law, everything. So it is something that is so serious that it will definitely have an effect internationally, not only for those of you living overseas, but also for us getting investments into the country, because there's no future without investment, especially now with the pandemic that we're having and the effects of COVID. We are desperate for investment, and something like EWC is absolutely the wrong move. And I surely hope from my side that the international community will start expressing themselves against this, because we cannot allow this to happen. And perhaps just to say, you're quite right when you said earlier, but we do have expropriation worldwide. It is part of the Constitution. It's part of our Constitution because it is needed. And therefore, you don't have to change Section 25. Provision is made within the Constitution. You need law of general application. That's what you need. But don't take away the court's role in this whole process. So from our side, please speak out. We have to make this government aware of the economic implications of this.
100%. I agree totally. I mean, thank you so much for that. I think, Noko, I don't know if you've got any closing thoughts before we wrap up. But have you got any closing thoughts?
Okay. I think my closing short, Justin, is that the DA believes that it is essential that we continue with the land reform in a manner that is consistent with the commitment state, obviously, to be implemented in a manner that increases agricultural production and not to impact negatively the economic growth. Obviously improve food security and ensure that land is shared equally. But I think, like Annelie said, I think it is important that you assist us in ensuring that we protect this rights of property ownership. I think that's critical. We haven't seen anywhere in the world where property being owned by the state really worked for the economy of the country. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you. Well, I mean, we have to come back to this at some point. This is a huge thing, and I think for those that are listening, that are watching, that are overseas, you kind of think, well, what can we do? How does it affect us? Well, we very easily, for us that live overseas, we have the benefit of some pounds or dollars or yen or whatever you might have. So there will be a donation link either on the screen or in the description. So please do click donate, help the DA stop this from happening. Okay, we can stop this, and we have to realize that it's bigger than just us. It's our families, it's our friends. Geopolitically, it's the whole Southern African region that will be affected. This depending on what your thought pattern is, this opens the door for certain other powers to start to make their inroads into the country. This has very, very wide-ranging consequences, but it can be stopped. And we have got a success story. This is not esoteric. This is not this. We have a success story. The Western Cape government is doing it. Give them the power to help the rest of the country do that. So everyone, thank you so much for listening, for watching. Noko, Annelie, thank you so much for your time. I really, 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 really do appreciate it. We've gone over it, but that's okay. That was very interesting, very informative. And I'd like to say thanks so much from all of us abroad for the hard work that you guys are doing in South Africa.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Justin.